Hi, Bao. Fantastic work submitting your next batch of essays, which is wonderful. I can already see some improvements, so you've taken on board what we said last time, and that's really great. So let's see what we've got this time then. So your essay this time was on the restoration of old buildings in major cities around the world and how this costs a lot of money. The argument here was that this money would be better spent on providing new housing and road development, and your task was to see to what extent you agree or disagree with this opinion. Like last time, I can see at the top of your essay that you've got a plan here. We said last time as well, this is really good for just giving you a couple of minutes just to work out which way your essay is going to go, so that during the stress of the exam you've got something to refer to. So it really is an invaluable skill to have. Let's have a look at your introduction. So experts throughout the developed and developing world have debated whether or not the country's wealth should be used to construct new homes or to renovate pre-existing structures. Some believe that the money should be used for new residential housing, but personally I strongly disagree. This essay will argue both sides of the issue, supported by examples from the UK government and recent studies. Okay, well done. So, nice introduction. It's strong. You've covered the 3 points that are good for an introduction. So the general description, which is outlining the question, showing that you've understood what the statement is about, giving your own opinion, which is good, and then to explain what the essay will do. So all good points there. Let's look at the language. So experts with an S, experts throughout both the developed and developing world have debated whether or not a country's wealth, so we don't want to be specific as to one country, because here we're talking about major cities around the world. So a country's wealth should be used to construct new homes or to renovate pre-existing structures. Good. Some believe that money, instead of the money should be used for new residential housing, but personally I strongly disagree. This essay will argue both sides, so plural there because we're both sides of the issue, supported by examples from the UK government and recent studies. Okay, well done, good, great introduction there. So then moving into your first paragraph, which is about increases in population and focusing on people's living conditions. Okay, so on the one hand, there is ample evidence that reconstructing historical landmarks can be beneficial for the country in the long term. Now, be careful with reconstructing, because it's not a direct synonym of renovating. So we're not rebuilding historical landmarks, but we're doing them up, so to speak. So we're renovating historical landmarks. So ample evidence that renovating historical landmarks can be beneficial for countries in the long term. So remember, we're keeping this general, because we're not talking about just one country, but we're talking about countries and cities across the world. Okay. The main reason behind this is because if a country rebuilds the main old attractions. Okay, so again, careful with rebuild, renovate, etc. So if a country renovates here, although we have used it before, so we could say if a country maintains, perhaps, because we're renovating in order to be able to maintain old attractions. Part of that would be renovating. So if a country maintains the old buildings, okay, so we're specifically talking about old buildings in this question, so rebuilds the main historical buildings. Okay. Okay, so the main historical buildings, the number of tourists visiting the country will rise. Okay. Consequently, this will increase the country's GDP, enabling it to further develop. Okay, good point. For example, recent empirical research from the UK government, good, nicely introduced there, demonstrated that 90% of all countries that followed this pathway benefited more in the long run. Okay, so I would argue that this last part of the sentence is not so clear. So how has it benefited more in the long run? Make it crystal clear to the examiner. So that instead of using this rather generalized phrase, we're saying they benefited more in the long run because they had a better economy, more jobs, etc. Okay. Therefore, it is conclusively clear that this method works. Okay, so this is a good example of a sentence to round off your paragraph and link to the question. What I would say is just to make that a little bit more clear. So you could say, therefore, although restoration is expensive, it works to increase income, for example. Okay, so we're linking directly to that question. So costs enormous amounts of money, so we're acknowledging it is expensive, but it's great because all of these reasons that you've mentioned here. So tourism, the economy. Okay, so just make that extra clear so that there can be no argument from the examiner that it's not clear what you meant there. Okay, so next one, on the other hand, although there is a case for financing the future, the impact of house shortages cannot be overstated. Well done, good. This is largely due to the number of native people settling in the country are also increasing exponentially. Okay, this sentence is slightly confusing. So what I would say we should do instead is to say this is largely due to the population increasing exponentially. That way you've eliminated quite a few words there and got your point across clearly. Okay, so this is largely due to the population increasing exponentially. For example, in a recent survey conducted on young adults, first-time buyers are struggling more than ever. Thus, it is possible to state beyond doubt that the limited number of housing so here, that limited housing is hindering potential... What do you mean by clients here? So limiting potential inhabitants, perhaps, so that people moving to that area, moving to that country can't find anywhere to live. Okay. Good. Now, I will say, with this example where you've got, for example, in a recent study conducted on young adults, can you be more specific? Where was this study from? Even if it's just the country. So, for example, a recent study in Germany conducted on young adults. Okay, can you be more specific in that one? But yes, very well done. Good. From the arguments with an S, arguments and examples with an S given, I firmly believe that utilising the country's income should be focused on the future. So take out the comma there, because we don't need that one. Should be focused on the future. It is predicted that the restoration of ancient buildings will increasingly grow in importance. Okay, so two things here. First one, from the arguments and examples given, I firmly believe that utilising the country's income should be focused on the future. And then I'd say including renovating old buildings. Okay, because focusing the money on the future is very broad, but our argument here is that renovating buildings is a good idea. So including renovating old buildings. It is predicted that the restoration of... Now, ancient is a little bit too strong here. So ancient is what we used to talk about Egypt or Rome, so the pyramids or the Colosseum in Rome. Whereas some of the buildings are not ancient per se, but they are very old. So here we would say historical buildings, or perhaps cultural buildings as well. So it is predicted that the restoration of historical buildings, cultural buildings, will increasingly grow in importance in the future. And then a little bit why. So will increasingly grow in importance in the future as restoration brings in more tourism, for example. Okay, just to round off that essay. But I can see that you've taken on board the idea of putting a prediction in the end, just to round off the essay. That you've taken on the advice about the definite article as well. So there are a lot less instances of that in this essay. There are still a couple. So have another check through, and on your next ones check through maybe twice. But this is really good improvement. So very well done. A piece of writing you should absolutely be proud of. Good. Okay. So your next piece was the shorter piece on the bar chart about chip manufacturers. Okay. So Intel and AMD. So the bar chart illustrates two different chip manufacturers, Intel and AMD, being sold in various months of 2017 in France. Now, be careful here, because we've got the passive phrase being sold. However, this indicates that the companies are being sold, whereas we're not talking about the company being sold, we're talking about their products being sold. So this bar chart illustrates the sales of two different computer chip manufacturers in 2017 in France. Okay, so we don't need various months because we've already got 2017. Okay, so the bar chart illustrates the sales of two different computer chip manufacturers in 2017 in France. Okay, good. Both Intel and AMD saw a fluctuation in sales throughout the year. Good, great opening sentence to that paragraph. Moreover, Intel's busiest month was in June, peaking at approximately 125,000 chips sold. Meanwhile, AMD saw their greatest number of chips being purchased by the general public in February, with their sales reaching roughly 120,000, just 5,000 shy of Intel's highest number. Okay, so when we use shy, we say shy of. So, and it's a great phrase to use. Just make sure you're using shy of. So just 5,000 units shy of Intel's highest number. Okay, good. Just double checking. AMD saw the greatest number of chips being purchased by the general public in February. Okay, we can make this sentence, meanwhile AMD saw their greatest number of chips being purchased by the general public in February. We can make that shorter by saying, meanwhile, AMD saw their greatest number of chips purchased in February. Okay, although we could state that it was by the general public, we don't have that information on here, so I would avoid that one. Okay, so AMD saw their greatest number of chips purchased in February, with their sales reaching roughly 120,000, just 5,000 shy of Intel's highest number. Okay, good. A very strong paragraph there, and particularly that phrase shy of is a really good one to use. On the other end of the spectrum, good, well done. AMD's worst month was in June when they sold, okay, so 0 amounts of their inventory. I would suggest here that we say when they sold nothing. Okay, the month of June was Intel's best month of the year regarding sales, but at the same time of year it was AMD's worst. Okay, so this last sentence actually repeating what we've already said, so we don't need that last bit. So what I would suggest is that we have on the other end of the spectrum, which is great, AMD's worst month was in June when they sold nothing, while June was Intel's best month of the year. Okay, so then I would give the number of sales there as well. So best month of the year at approximately 120,000 units. Okay. Overall, in 2017, Intel outperformed AMD in sales during 7 of the 12 months. On average, AMD performed best in the second half of the year, and Intel was relatively consistent throughout. Okay, well done. A very good piece of writing for your comparisons there. So instead of just listing numbers, you've worked that information so that you're giving us a comparison, more of an analysis of that graph, which is great. Like I said before, some great phrases. So shy of is a particularly good one. On the other end of the spectrum is great. A couple of bits to change. So when they sold nothing, for example. And when we've got a small repetition here, so we've already said about it being the worst month, so then we don't have to say it at the end here as well. But yes, 2 very strong pieces of writing. Very well done, enjoyable read. Good work.